Let me begin the today's class. So today we are going to discuss the concept of entity authentication. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Any other responses?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine.
Yes, sir.
So let me begin with today's class. So today we are going to discuss the concept of entity authentication. So these are the contents for today's class. So first of all, we are going to distinguish between message authentication and entity authentication. In the earlier classes, we do have studied the concept of message authentication. Then we will see what we mean by the witness or witnesses, which have been used for identification. Then we will discuss some of the methods of entity authentication using a password method or password mechanism. Thereafter, we are going to see or we are going to introduce some of the protocols which falls under challenge response protocols for entity authentication. Thereafter, we are going to see some of the protocols which falls under zero knowledge protocols, which are again used for entity authentication. Then we do have some other things as well, like biometrics, and those biometrics can be used to distinguish between psychological and behavioral techniques. So these are the outlines for today's class. Now, what is an entity authentication? So an entity authentication is a technique which is designed to let one party prove the identity of the another party. And whenever we say an entity, that means an entity can represent a person, a process, a client, or a server, or a program. Okay, so uh, an entity can be represented, or an entity can represent any of these. Now, the entity whose identity needs to be proved is called the claimant. This is the important one. Okay, an entity whose identity needs to be proved is called the claimant. Okay, and the party that tries to prove the identity of the claimant is called the verifier. Who is proving the identity is called the verifier, and who needs to prove his or her identity is called the claimant. Okay, so in this particular section, these are the points which we are going to discuss. Your data origin versus entity authentication, then verification categories, then entity authentication and key management. So let us first distinguish data origin versus entity authentication. So in the earlier classes, when we were discussing about your message modification code and message authentication code, those were the examples of your data origin authentication. And now in this class, we are studying entity authentication. And what is the difference between these two? The difference is, whenever we talk about message authentication, it means that particular communication might not happen in the real time. And the moment we talk about entity authentication, then this type of communication may happen or generally happens in real time. Okay, this is the one of the major difference between these two. Okay, means message authentication may not happen real time while the other may happen. And the second difference is, your message authentication simply authenticates one message, and then the process needs to be repeated for each new message. Okay, let's say we have got 10 number of messages and we want to send those 10 number of messages to the other party in case of mail. So each time you are sending a message, every time you need to authenticate yourself to the other party. And the same is not true for the entity authentication. Okay, here we prove our identity for a session. As long as we are there in the session, we do not need to prove our identity again and again. It will remain activated for the whole duration of the session. Okay, this is one of the major difference or the other difference between these two. For example, if we consider the working of emails, what happens in emails? The moment we send an email to somebody, then it may possible that the person who is reading that email might not be present at that time. Might not present at the time is the person who has sent the email might not be online at that time. Okay, he would have sent at some time, then whenever receiver has got the time, he is reading that message. So it is not necessary at all that both the parties should be present at the same time in order to send and receive the message. So this is a classical example of message authentication. And the moment we talk about the entity authentication, let's say we are trying to withdraw some money from an ATM. So what happens? We need to present inside the ATM in order to perform the transaction with the ATM, right? So that is an example of entity authentication, where we authenticate ourselves one, then for the whole sessions we get authenticated for the transactions, right? And the moment session gets end, only then our authentication will get over, right? So these are the difference between your data origin and entity authentication. Okay, then there are three types of verification categories through which we can identify someone, we can verify someone, and these three are something known, something possessed, and then something inherent. So in the first case, a secret is generally known only by the claimant, and that can be checked by the verifier. And the example of this can be, let's say, a private key or a PIN or a secret key, means there is something which only the claimant know. Okay. Then the second one is something possessed, and this is again the claimant can prove his or her identity by showing something which is possessed by the claimant. And the examples of this can be any document, for example, passport or the license or any card like a smart card. Okay, something. So we are just trying to describe what do we exactly mean by something possessed. Okay, the moment somebody just try to authenticate somebody, then that party can show that document or that proof. Then something inherent. So over here we are talking about the properties or the characteristics which the claimant will be having. For example, the signatures or the voice or the retinal pattern or the iris or the handwriting or the fingerprints. So these are the characteristics of the parties or of the claimant. Okay, so these are the three types of verification categories which can be used in order to verify the claimant or the verifier as well. Now we are going to discuss three things which are used for authentication. The first thing is your password based authentication. The second one is your challenge response based authentication, and the third one is your zero knowledge protocol. And all these three we have seen while I was discussing the outlines for this class, right? So in the first one, what happens? We make the use of a password which proves the identity of the claimant, and this is the simplest and the oldest method of entity authentication. Okay, and we call it as a password based authentication. Okay, so what happens in this particular case? The claimant has a password, and of course that password and the identity of the claimant is already registered at the other party, and the moment the first party tries to communicate, first the first party has to authenticate himself or herself. Okay, I guess we should have the diagram. Yes. So over here, Alice is trying to get connected with the Bob. So as we can see, Bob has already got the identity of the first party or the party which is trying to communicate with the Bob. So here we have got the identity of the Alice along with her password. Okay, so this table is being preserved by the verifier. In this case is Bob. Okay, Bob is the verifier. So the moment Alice presents her identity along with the password is being matched with the stored password. If it matches, then the access is granted to the Alice, otherwise the access is denied. So this is a typical flow of your fixed password based authentication scheme. Okay, or in which we make the use of user ID and a password. Okay, so I guess there should not be any sort of difficulty in this particular example. And in this particular approach, there can be many types of attacks. For example, eavesdropping, anybody can see the password. Thereafter, stealing a password, somebody can try to steal a password from Alice or maybe Bob. Then accessing a password file. Okay, whatever it may, because since all the passwords and the identity of all the users are being stored in a file, so try to steal this particular file which contains the password of all the communicating parties can also be done. Then guessing, of course, whatever passwords are there, one can also try to guess all the passwords. So these are the types of attacks which may happen on this particular approach. Now, the second approach. So in this approach, we can see now rather than comparing the password itself, now we are comparing the hashes which have been created from the password. If the hashes matches, then the access is granted. Otherwise, the access is denied. Okay, and this particular mechanism will prevent the attacks where someone is trying to get this particular file. So if somebody gets this file, then he or she will get, or the imposter will only get, or the adversary only get the hash value. And from the hash value, as we know, this is one-way function. Okay, so the attacker will not be able to know the actual password. So this way we can prevent those sort of attacks by hashing the password. Okay. Now this is the third approach. In the second approach, however, the attacker or the adversary may try by having dictionary attacks, where the adversary try all the possible options, or all the key space is being explored in order to find out the password. Okay, and we are of course assuming that the length of the password is not that much high. Okay, so this particular approach is generally used to prevent the dictionary attacks. Okay, so what happens over here, we increase the length of the password. Okay, of course, again here we are talking about the hashes and all. So in this case, what happens, we include a salt. We include a salt, and then we concatenate this salt with the password. And what is the salt over here? This is a randomly generated string. Okay, salt is nothing but a randomly generated string. For example, the length of our password is 6-bit, and we have concatenated a 4-bit salt with it. So in general, the length of the password now will become of the size 10 bits. So the key space would be more. That means the adversary has to now explore a lot of possibilities. So that will again improve the security of the overall system. Okay. And when this particular thing matches, then the access is granted, otherwise the access is denied. So this is the third approach, and this particular approach is only used by your Unix systems. Then there is one more approach, and in this particular approach, we use two identification mechanism, or you can say two types of authentication. And the very good example of this type is your ATM. Okay, in case of ATM, we present a physical card along with a password, which is your PIN. So one has to have the ATM card as well as a PIN. So when we have both of these things, only then the access can be granted. Okay, so this is the fourth approach where more than one identification techniques are combined in order to grant the access. Okay. Now, the cases which we have discussed were the examples of your fixed password. Okay, and now we are going to discuss the other type, which is one-time password. And as the name itself suggests, that the one-time password will only be used for the first time, or can only be used for a single communication. Okay, the same password will not be or cannot be used for the other communications. Okay. Now, again, we have got number of approaches for one-time password as well. In the first approach, the user and the system do agree upon a list of password. Okay, you might have observed this particular thing in your Gmail as well, as I have protected my Gmail account with two-step verification mechanism. So I also got some number of passwords, and the moment I'm not able to log into my Gmail account, then I only use those fixed 10 passwords which have been provided to me by the Google. Okay, so it may possible that I may not be able to authenticate my Gmail account with my mobile. Okay, so we generally use our mobile to enter the OTP, or just to click the ping message that I'm the person who's trying to use my Gmail account, right? So it may possible that I do not have a signal in my mobile, or the network or the internet is not working in my mobile, or I may have lost the mobile. I'm not currently having my mobile. So in those cases, those fixed password which I have already noted and I always keep in my pocket will come into picture. So this is the same approach. So in this case, we or the system agrees upon a fixed list of password, and whenever the parties wants to communicate together, they use those fixed list of password. Okay, and of course they have to use those password in a sequential manner, otherwise they would have to search the password. Then in second approach, the user and the system agree to sequentially update the password. For example, we have got two parties, Alice and Bob, right? Now the moment Alice tries to communicate with Bob for the first time, let's say with the password P0. So while this communication is going on with the help of P0 password, they also exchange another password for the next session. Let's say they have communicated a password P1, okay, with the use of P0 password, and then P1 password will be used for the next communication. Okay, and similarly, while they are communicating with the help of P1, next time they do agree upon a third password, let's say P2, and the same process goes on again and again. And the scheme like this can also be used to facilitate the one-time password authentication. Okay, I hope you would have got the concept. And in the third approach, the user and the system create a sequentially updated password using a hash function. In this particular approach, we are using a concept of hashing. So what happens in this concept? Let's say again we have got two parties, Alice and Bob, and both the parties agrees upon one or the first initial password, let's say P0. Okay, and apart from this, they also agrees on a number n. Okay, so let's say it's 100. So whenever they try to communicate, they need to hash the password. For example, for the first communication, they need to hash this particular password for the first time. Only the one stage hashing has to be applied over this password for the first communication. And the moment they try to communicate again, next time, they have to perform double hashing. Means whatever hash value has been generated, again a hash has to be applied on that earlier generated hash value. Okay, so this is how the parties do communicate together in this particular mechanism, which is called as a Lamport one-time password. Okay, so they just communicate with the help of hashing, and if they are trying to communicate first time, then only one-time hashing is applied. If they are trying to communicate second time, then double hashing will be applied for third time, third hashing, and so on, so forth. And if they matches, then the access is granted. Otherwise, the access is denied. Okay, so this is one of the mechanism for one-time password-based authentication. So I hope you would have got the concept. Now we have got another type of entity authentication called as challenge response based authentication. So in password based authentication, the claimant generally proves his or her identity by demonstrating that he or she knows a secret, which in general happens to be a password. While in case of challenge response authentication, the claimant tries to prove that he or she knows a secret without sending it. Okay, in the earlier cases we were sending it, but this time we just try to prove the identity of the claimant without actually sending a secret. Okay, and these are the types of challenge response based authentication. Okay, symmetric key has functions, asymmetric key ciphers, and using digital signatures. So the challenge response based authentication scheme can be facilitated with the help of these types. So as explained earlier, in challenge response authentication, the claimant proves that he or she knows the secret without sending it to the verifier. And the challenge is a time varying value. Okay, means whatever value is being sent, that is going to be changed with time. And the response is the result of function applied on that challenge. So we are going to see how exactly it happens. So this is the first approach, and this approach is called as a nonce challenge. Okay, so again we assume two parties, Alice and Bob. Here Alice happens to be the claimant and Bob happens to be the verifier in this communication. So in the first step, Alice sends a message that she wants to have a communication with the Bob. Okay, thus Alice let Bob know that she is trying to communicate with Bob. Okay, however, this particular step is not considered in the protocol. This is just this particular communication let Bob know that Alice is trying to communicate with him. Now, the moment Bob knows that Alice is trying to communicate with him, what Bob does is he sends a nonce number or a random generated number. Okay, this is a randomly generated number and we call it as a nonce. Okay, and this number is being sent by Bob to Alice. And the moment Alice gets this number, she encrypts this number with the help of a shared secret key of Alice and Bob to Bob. Okay, the received nonce is being encrypted with the shared secret key and then being sent to the Bob, where Bob decrypts this message and gets his nonce number back. Okay, if the nonce number is same as the sent one, that means that the Alice is the legitimate person who is trying to access Bob. Okay, so this is the first one, where without actually sending a password, Alice has managed to prove the her authentication or her identity. Okay, so this is the first approach. And what is this shared secret key? This is your symmetric key, which of course has been there with Alice and Bob before the communication. Okay. Now this is second approach, and what happens in this particular approach, rather than sending the nonce value over here, we are using a notion of timestamp. Okay, and the beauty of this particular mechanism that we need not to, or the Bob need not to send a random number to Alice. Only one set of communication is sufficient, or you can say only one communication is sufficient to prove the identity of the Alice to Bob. And how exactly this timestamp is helping this out? Here we are assuming that Alice and Bob both are synchronized. Okay, this particular approach will not be valid if the Alice and Bob are not fully synchronized. So they have to synchronize. Okay, and if they are synchronized, then this timestamp upon receiving can be matched. If it is matched, that means the Alice is the legitimate person who is trying to access Bob. Okay. Then we have got another approach, and this is termed as bidirectional authentication. In this particular category, Alice and Bob both are trying to verify each other. In the earlier cases, only Alice was trying to prove her identity. Okay, but in some cases, it may be possible that Alice also wants to ensure about the identity of the verifier. So in this particular mechanism, both the parties are proving their identities. Okay, and the mechanism is the same as we have discussed in the other approaches. So Alice first sends a message that she wants to communicate with Bob. Okay, then Bob sends a nonce number, okay, which is a randomly generated number to Alice. Then Alice sends back that nonce number along with her nonce number, and of course both these numbers are going to be the different one. Okay, and both these numbers are being sent by applying a shared secret key. Okay, so a symmetric key, it is already there with Alice and Bob. Okay, so upon receiving these numbers at Bob's end, Bob then again send these two numbers to Alice, and this time the change is that the sequence has been changed. Okay, earlier we were sending RA, RB, and now this time Bob is sending RB, RS, so that the replay attack can be prevented. Okay, so this way the identity of both the parties will be proven. Okay, at this stage, the Alice was sending her nonce number, and from this step, Alice will be able to have her nonce number back. So this way, both will prove their identity to each other. Okay, so this is your challenge response protocol. Now we can also use the concept of your keyed hashed functions in order to prove the identity of the parties. And in this one, again, the concept of hashing is being used, Okay, you can say the MAC is being used along with a timestamp. Okay, so this particular thing, which has already been discussed in detail in the earlier classes, can also be used in order to prove the authentication. Okay, because the key is going to be there, or this particular key is a secret share key. So upon receiving this particular message, if the received timestamp is same as this timestamp, then the access will be granted, otherwise not. Okay, then another type is using an asymmetric key cipher. In the earlier cases, the first cases of challenge response based authentication, where we have made the use of your symmetric key ciphers. Okay, then keys has values, and in this case we are going to use your asymmetric key ciphers. Okay, and the name itself suggests that in this type we are going to use the concept of asymmetric keys. Okay, so over here, as you can see, that Alice has sent a message to Bob. Okay, and this time the nonce number of Bob along with his identity has been encrypted by the public key of Alice. Okay, and of course we have to assume, or we are assuming, that the public key of all the communicating parties are available with the Bob. Okay, so the public key of Alice is already there with Bob. So Bob is encrypting his nonce number along with his identity using the public key of Alice, and Alice can decrypt this particular message with a private key. Okay, then the nonce number will send back to the Bob, and that way Bob will be able to know that the Alice is a legitimate person who is trying to access me. Okay, so this is your one of the approach, and this one also called as a unidirectional approach. Why unidirectional? Because only one party is trying to prove the identity, and the moment both the parties needs to prove their identity, then this is what has to be done. Okay, both the parties will send their nonce number, okay, by encrypting the public key, by encrypting that with the public key of the other party. Okay, so Alice will encrypt this one by using the public key of Bob. Okay, and Bob will do the same by using the public key of Alice. Okay, and that way they will transfer their nonce number, and this particular mechanism can be used the identity of the both the parties, and this particular concept is called as a bidirectional asymmetric key based approach. Okay, which falls under your challenge response based authentication. And the concept of digital signature can also be used in order to prove the identity. Okay, over here, the nonce number is being signed with the help of Alice private key. Okay, so if Bob is able to decrypt this one, of course, the Bob will be able to decrypt this one with the Alice public key, and this way the Bob will be able to know that only this particular message has been sent by the Alice only, since this has been encrypted or signed with the Alice private key. So this particular approach can also be used for authentications. And of course, the bidirectional mechanism can also be facilitated with the help of your digital signature, where both the parties are sending their nonce number by signing with their private keys. Okay, so this way both the parties will be able to verify each other. So this approach includes the mechanism of digital signature to prove the identity of each other. So I hope these things are pretty much clear to you. Okay, so as of now, we are able to discuss the password-based protocols, then challenge-based protocol, and now the third type is zero-knowledge protocol. So in this particular protocol, the claimant does not reveal anything that might endanger the confidentiality of the secret. Okay, Rather, the claimant proves to the verifier that she knows the secret without revealing it. Okay, earlier it was not sending it, and now in this case it is not revealing. Means the claimant is not revealing it. So the instructions are so designed that they cannot lead to revealing or guessing the secret. So the topics which we are going to discuss in this particular protocol are Fiat-Shamir protocol, pitch Fiat-Shamir protocol, and GQ protocol. Okay, Gillow Chris Quarter protocol. So let's see. This particular diagram will seems to be very familiar to you guys since we have already discussed the concept of Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Okay, so this is pretty much similar to that one only. Okay, or you can say that protocol was derived from these concepts only. So what happens over here? Again, we have got a concept of your public key and private key. Okay, we do have certain communication with the help of your public key and private key. So as you can see that something is first calculated over here, the X, or you can say the witness is calculated, then a challenge is thrown to the other party, and then the challenge is being used along with your private key. Okay, and then a value is being calculated, for example Y, and which is being sent to the next party or the other party. Okay, and if the calculation matches, then we prove the identity of the party who's trying to communicate with the Bob. If not, then the communication is aborted. So over here again a value is being encrypted, okay, with the help of a private key. Then the things are being sent to the other party, okay, and over there the public key is being used to reduce the expression, and then the things are compared. If they matches, then the access is granted, otherwise not. Okay. So this is called as a Fiat-Shamir protocol, which makes use of your public key and private key. And of course, some values are being assumed and some values are being exchanged. Since we already discussed your Diffie-Hellman protocol, so that is why I'm not going to discuss this one into detail. This is pretty similar to that one only. And this can be analogous to your CAV example, where the moment someone's try to prove the identity of the other party may ask the first party to just cross this trapdoor function or this particular door, okay, which may be locked. So the moment somebody is trying to prove his or her identity, at step number 2, we can ask to pass him either by this way or this way. If the person is able to cross this door and come back to this point, that means the person has got the key, okay, which he or she has used to pass from this door. Okay, so this is the analogy of your zero knowledge protocol. And this is one of the variation of your Fiat-Shamir protocol called as a Fiat-Shamir protocol. Over here, in the earlier cases, the challenge which was being used was a binary number, either 0 or 1. Okay. Over here, these calculations are pretty simple. You can say again the random number. Okay. Then you have to square it. Then you have to calculate the model, which is a. So these are pretty simple calculations, not the typical one. So over here, rather than using a set of values, we are using two vectors. Okay, the challenges are, you can say we do use number of challenges along with the number of private keys and public keys. Okay, so rather than having a fixed private and public key and a challenge, we use a vector of these, vector of private key, public key, and the challenge. Okay, and at all these steps, the authentication has to be done. If even in a single step authentication gets failed, then the overall authentication will be aborted. Okay. And in this GQ protocol, it is pretty much similar to your first one as well. The only difference here, the number of steps have been reduced, and in this case, your challenge C is nothing but a value in between 1 to E. And how exactly we calculate E, that again we have discussed in detail while discussing your RSA algorithms and all. Okay, so it is similar to that one only. So these are your zero knowledge protocols. Okay. And now the last step is proving the identity with the help of biometrics. So biometrics is the measurement of the psychological or behavior features that identify a person. Okay. And in this case, the authentications by something is inherent. So the biometric features or the measured features that cannot be guessed, stolen, or shared, these are the characteristics of biometric features. Means one cannot guess it and one cannot steal it, okay, or share it. So components, several components are needed for biometrics, including capturing devices, processor, and storage devices. Of course, so whenever we want to have or we want to adopt the mechanisms of biometric, we need to have some components or the devices through which we are able to capture the biometrics, and then how we are going to store them, how we are going to process them. So those things has to be there, and we call them as one of the component or the components, and the enrollment. So before authentication, each and every entity needs to enroll itself or themselves, okay, in order to create a database. Okay, and the database will be referred later to prove the authentication. Then the authentication can be done in two varieties. The first one is verification and the other one is identification. Verification means we are trying to match one to one. Okay, if we are trying to match one to one, then it is verification. If we are trying to match one to many, then that particular approach is called as a identification. Okay, we may have a database, and from the database we want to match a face of a person. If that is the process, then that is identification. And let's say we have got two face data, and then we are trying to match those two face data in one-to-one mapping, then that will become the process of verification. Okay, and these are the famous biometrics techniques. If we talk about the psychological categories, then these are the techniques and these are the behavioral. Okay, so psychological may be your fingerprints, iris, retina, face, hands, voice, and DNA. And behavioral means signature, your hand signatures, and keystroke. However, this particular one is not that much efficient and may vary time by time. Okay, so this is not the effective one, but can also at some places is also used to prove the identity. So these are the techniques, okay, which were discussed, and we can measure the accuracy by these two things: false rejection ratio, where in the first case your system should verify a person, but falsely the system has rejected that identity. And in the latter case, which is a false acceptance rate, a legitimate person has been denied the entry. Okay, this one is your false. Sorry, the adversary has falsely given the entry. Okay, so this is your later case. So there are many applications, of course. I hope this particular lecture is pretty much clear to all of you. Okay, and you can just exercise this one since we have already discussed Diffie-Hellman protocol. So that these things will not be challenging at all to all of you. So please exercise this ones. Okay, and let me know if you do not get it. With this, I'll end today's class. And before that, I would like to discuss few things with you.